Hi everyone, we're Group 5A and today we'll be covering The New Japanese Woman, a book by Barbara Hamill Sato. Here we'll be unpacking the main narratives that The New Japanese Woman depicts, with relation to the reading for the week by Kathleen Canning, talking about gender history. We've picked out two themes, consumerism and women's identity, and the negative reactions to modernism and the images of the new women, and we will link these themes to the reading. About the author, Barbara Hamill Sato was born in 1942, and she's written many books about gender history in Japan, most notably Gender and Modernity, Rereading Japanese Women's Magazines, Japanese Women and Modernism, and Reconsidering Americanism in the 1920s. So this indicates a continued interest and expertise in the subject of Japanese feminism, which will be helpful in learning about the history of feminism outside of a Eurocentric perspective. About the book, The New Japanese Woman presents a vivid social history of the new woman who emerged in Japanese culture between the world wars, and it shows how images of the modern woman burst into the Japanese life in the midst of urbanization, growth of the middle class, and the explosion of consumerism resulting from the post-war economic boom in the 1920s. Sato also analyzes the icons that came to represent the new urban femininity. So we have the modern girl, the housewife, and the professional working woman. And Sato describes how these images portrayed in the media shaped and were shaped by women's desires. Although these figures of the modern woman by no means represented all Japanese women, they did somewhat challenge the myth of a fixed definition of femininity in the stereotype emphasizing gentleness and meekness, and they generate a new set of possibilities for middle-class women within the context of consumer culture.
The first theme of the book talks about consumerism and women's identity. The Meiji Civic Code of 1898 offered limited protection to women domestically and socially, and favored men in other aspects, thus supporting the ideology of a good wife and wise mother. As such, women's lives were defined by home and family. So while shopping for personal and household commodities, women were exposed to decision-making which empowered them. Paul Glennie observed, and I quote, "Departmental stores were pivotal sites of cultural appropriation and identity construction." Furthermore, the media, which is used as a medium for consumerism to spread into Japanese society, changed women's consciousness of femininity and served as a forum for women to assert their political and social rights.
Many feminist intellectuals, particularly of Marxist persuasions, initially disapproved of capitalism as a tool for advancement of women's rights. They believed that capitalism placed women, who had additional obligations in the household, in unfair competition against men in the labor market. They also criticized consumer culture as surface level and not depicting the lives of everyday working class women, as opposed to those in the middle class who adopted aspects of American bourgeois culture. Some intellectuals, such as Hirabayashi, eventually came around to consumerism, seeing how it had, and I quote, "marked a new stage in the self-conceptualization of urban women," end quote. Notably, he no longer believed that a working-class revolution was necessary for the liberation of women in society, as the advancement of technology had the potential to do so. Consumerism gave ordinary women in Japan the power to express their own identity rather than being dictated by the state. It thus marked a shift from the image of women as homemakers and obedient wives to having their own thoughts, interests, and opinions. Consumerism in the interwar period marked the popularization of Western social ideals in Japanese society, such as equality, human rights, and individuality. Women became aware of the inequities they faced in comparison to men, which resulted in desire for gender equality. This also resulted in the social and cultural redefinition of Japanese women and the birth of the new woman archetype. With this, we shall move on to Theme 2.
Next, I'm going to examine general reactions to modernism and the images of new women. Consumerism was referred to by intellectuals at that time as modernism, a neologism that combined the English modern with ism. And new types of women, the modern girl, the housewife, and the professional woman, came to fore in the 1920s against the backdrop of consumerism, namely modernism. However, these new images of women were not necessarily accepted favorably. For instance, even only looking into the modern girl, Sato listed many examples of negative reactions to them. Because of the flamboyant style of the modern girl, the representation of them as a purveyor of bourgeois consumerism, it stirred up anxieties among intellectuals and the public at large about the direction in which society was moving. The negative views equated the Moga with a bar hostess or prostitute and led to her being labeled a delinquent. The media reported scandals of Moga as if all Mogas are like that. The most negative criticism of them came from liberal intellectuals who were struggling with the internalization of Western culture and civilization themselves. So the strategic function played by the media in the articulation of the modern girl, the housewife, and the professional working woman was dumped by some and praised by others.
Under the theme of negative reactions towards the new Japanese woman, we identified a sub-theme being the general mistrust of women's ability to contribute constructively in the business world. This is due to much of the prejudice having its roots in the conviction that women belonged at home. We see the prejudice in a statement made by a high official in the Home Ministry. He declared, "I know that the term good wife and wise mother has been around for a long time, but it has a profound meaning. For a woman to seek employment as a means of challenging a man's position is the greatest tragedy in the history of women. The very idea that if a woman holds a job, she will be liberated and become independent smacks of hysteria." At the workplace, the professional woman faces discrimination. In the ogling eyes of their male counterparts in offices, working women found themselves seen in terms of their decorative rather than utilitarian value. Many businessmen regarded the professional working woman as a sexual accoutrement and hired them to facilitate difficult business transactions and attract male customers. We further see the sexualization of the professional woman through representation in the media, where the magazine devoted substantial space to the erotic and grotesque elements of the new consumer culture. The magazine's take on the various types of girls and their distinguishing features added zest to its June 1930 issue. Among the girls included were the mannequin girl, 1 yen taxi girl, gasoline girl, and mahjong girl. The common element of these girls were that they were employed women displayed as sex objects or commercial come-ons. So how this has impacted gender differences in the workplace is that there is social dislocation. Though they initially exhibit personal determination taking their first jobs, they begin to question their initial convictions and rely on their looks to get by. This stems from their being a part of a capitalist system in which no attention is paid to a woman's qualifications or to whether family circumstances necessitate her work.
To link to the readings, consumerism allowed an outlet for women to debate their gender social status, and it allowed social change to be depoliticized and be in the hands of the masses. In addition, women and femininity were continuously viewed as unstable and inferior to be productive in comparison to men, to paraphrase Canning. While the introduction of consumerism in the 1920s allowed for mass suffrage to take place in the modern household and on the streets, entrenched beliefs in female servitude held back further development of modern feminism in Japan, where its effects are still seen in the present day in the example given in the lower right.